At first, the men on the wall thought it was a tower. It rose from the dust beyond bowshot, higher than the tents, higher than the wagons, a black frame of timber standing against the morning haze. No horse pulled it. No slaves pushed it forward. It did not crawl toward the ditch like a ram or a siege tower. It simply waited, silent and upright, while carpenters moved beneath it like priests around an altar. Then the long arm dropped. Something huge tore upward through the air. For one heartbeat, the defenders saw only a dark shape crossing the sun. Then the stone came down. It struck the wall with a sound that seemed too deep for wood or earth, a single brutal crack that ran through the masonry and into the bones of every man standing on it. Dust burst from the joints. A shield fell from someone's hand. Somewhere below, a mule screamed. The question in that moment was not whether the wall could be repaired. Men had repaired walls for centuries. The question was more frightening. What kind of enemy could throw a mountain? For most of ancient and medieval war, walls were the great promise of survival. They did not make a city invincible, but they changed the conversation. A field army could be broken in an afternoon. A town behind stone could endure for months. It could wait for disease to pass through the besiegers' camp, for rain to rot their supplies, for allies to appear on the horizon. A wall turned courage into time. And time was power. Behind walls, kings stored grain, merchants hid silver, priests guarded relics, and families listened through the night for the rhythm of enemy tools. A siege was not only a contest of strength. It was a contest of patience. Outside the walls, the attacker bled money, food, horses, and morale. Inside the walls, the defenders counted arrows, counted loaves, counted the dead, and told themselves that stone remembered how to stand. Before the trebuchet, siege warfare already had its monsters. There were rams with iron heads, swung beneath roofs of wet hides. There were towers rolled toward battlements, their wheels groaning under men and timber. There were ladders, hooks, mines, firepots, and torsion engines that twisted rope and sinew until stored violence snapped forward. Roman engineers had mastered machines that hurled stones and bolts with terrifying precision. Chinese armies had used traction trebuchets, powered by teams of men pulling ropes in sudden, coordinated bursts. Across empires and centuries, attackers learned to threaten height, gait, and fear. But the counterweight trebuchet was different. It did not depend on the muscle of men at the moment of release. It did not merely shoot. It swung. It transformed weight into motion, gravity into punishment. At one end of its massive beam hung a box or basket filled with stones, earth, or lead. At the other end, a sling held the projectile. When the counterweight fell, the long arm whipped upward, the sling extended the arc, and the stone was released with a violence that felt almost unnatural. The machine was not magic. It was geometry, timber, rope, iron, carpentry, mathematics, and labor. That made it more frightening. Because magic could be doubted. Engineering could be repeated. No single place can honestly claim every secret of the trebuchet's birth. The story moves across continents. Earlier traction machines were known in China long before the great counterweight engines appeared in Western siege warfare. Knowledge traveled through war, trade, prisoners, translators, and frightened reports carried from one ruler to another. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the counterweight trebuchet had become one of the most feared siege engines in Eurasia. In the hands of determined armies, it changed what commanders believed a wall could promise. Imagine the old world before it arrived. A fortress on a ridge. A city gate reinforced with iron. Archers on the parapet, their faces wrapped against dust. Below them, the besieging camp stretches across the plain. Fires burn low. Men sharpen tools. Oxen drag beams through mud. The defenders watch all of it with a grim confidence, because they know the old rules. If the enemy comes close, arrows will cut them down. If ladders rise, poles will push them away. If miners dig, countermines may meet them underground with knives, smoke, and panic in the dark. But then the besiegers begin building farther back. Too far for arrows. Too far for stones dropped from the wall. The defenders laugh at first, or try to. A machine beyond reach seems like a machine without courage. Yet day after day the frame grows taller. Uprights are raised. Crossbeams are lashed. Axes bite into timber. Ropes are braided. A sling is tested in the dust. The soldiers inside the city begin to understand that something new is being assembled outside the range where bravery usually matters. That is the first wound a trebuchet inflicts: distance. It tells the defenders that their wall is no longer the edge of danger. The enemy can stand beyond the old killing ground and still touch them. The protected space shrinks. The mind has to redraw the battlefield. For the attackers, the machine is not just a weapon. It is a campaign. Before a trebuchet can throw a single stone, forests must be cut. Roads must carry beams. Craftsmen must measure angles, balance arms, shape axles, and trust ropes that may kill men if they fail. Animals haul timber. Laborers dig foundations. Blacksmiths make fittings. Commanders protect the work crews. Quartermasters feed them. Scouts search for stone of the right weight, because a projectile too light wastes force, and a projectile too heavy may break the machine or fall short with humiliating finality. Siege engineering is war slowed down until every mistake becomes expensive. And yet, when the first cast lands, all that slow work becomes sudden. The arm drops. The sling cracks open. The stone climbs into the sky, almost graceful for a moment, before gravity takes command. Men on the wall look upward, unable not to look. There is always that terrible pause before impact, when every defender tries to guess where the stone will fall, and none of them can move far enough. Then the wall answers. Sometimes it resists. A strong wall absorbs the blow, sheds dust, and stands. The defenders cheer, because men need proof that fear can be mocked. The engineers outside adjust the sling. They change the release. They mark the strike. They prepare another stone. Again. Again. The second impact finds a joint. The third knocks loose old repairs. The fourth sends fragments spinning into the walkway. It is not always one spectacular breach. More often, it is persuasion by violence. Stone by stone, crack by crack, the machine argues with the wall until the wall begins to lose. For the men inside, this is a different kind of terror from a charge. A charge gives the body a place to put fear. You grip the spear. You raise the shield. You wait for the collision and hope your line holds. A trebuchet gives fear time to grow. Each shot is announced by motion. The beam rises. The sling releases. The projectile appears. Everyone hears it coming, and no one knows whose name is written on it. It may strike the battlement. It may smash a roof. It may crash into a church, a granary, a hospital, a street full of civilians carrying water. Stones do not respect rank, prayer, or innocence. A commander may stand beside a cook and die in the same burst of masonry. That was part of the weapon's power. It did not only attack the wall. It attacked the idea of shelter. In famous sieges across the medieval world, great trebuchets became characters in the story. Chroniclers gave them names, because men name the things they fear. Some were said to hurl stones hundreds of pounds in weight. Some were built in pieces and assembled before a doomed city. Some threw not only rocks, but fire, carcasses, and diseased matter, turning the sky itself into a road for horror. The most famous reports may be exaggerated. Medieval writers loved numbers that made kings look mighty and enemies look cursed. But exaggeration itself tells us something. People did not describe these machines as ordinary tools. They described them as unnatural presences, engines that seemed to bring the force of the landscape into human hands. To build one was to make a political statement. A ruler who could bring a great trebuchet to a siege was saying more than, "I can break your wall." He was saying, "I can gather timber, craftsmen, animals, food, iron, rope, and time. I can organize a world outside your gate. I can keep men working while your people starve. I can turn patience into impact." That is why the trebuchet belongs in the history of systems, not just weapons. It required administration. It rewarded planning. It punished isolated courage. A brave defender could shoot arrows all day and still be helpless against an engine beyond his range. A reckless attacker could rush the walls and die beneath boiling water, while a disciplined commander might stand back, protect the engineers, and let gravity do the work. The machine changed the emotional rhythm of a siege. Instead of one desperate assault, there could be days of measured punishment. Instead of the attacker proving courage at the base of the wall, the defender had to endure helplessness in public. Every impact was watched by both sides. The besiegers saw dust rise and morale crack. The defenders saw their own certainty fall in pieces. Civilians began to ask whether the Lord who promised protection had promised too much. No wall falls only because of stone. Hunger matters. Disease matters. Betrayal matters. Politics, weather, bad water, broken alliances, and exhausted nerves all matter. The trebuchet did not erase these forces. It joined them. It gave commanders another way to apply pressure, another tool for turning a defended city into a decision. That decision could be surrender. Many sieges ended not when attackers poured through a breach, but when defenders looked at the damage, counted the food, measured the fear, and chose to open the gate before massacre followed. In that sense, a trebuchet's greatest strike might be the one it never had to throw. The sight of the machine, the memory of what it had done elsewhere, the dull certainty that tomorrow would bring more stones, could be enough. But when a breach did open, the world narrowed to dust and shouting. Men who had spent weeks waiting suddenly had seconds to live. The broken section of wall became a throat through which violence tried to force itself. Attackers rushed forward with shields over their heads, stumbling over rubble and bodies. Defenders fought from the edges, thrusting spears into the gap, rolling stones down the slope of collapse, coughing through lime dust and smoke. Orders disappeared under the sound of iron, screams, and splintering wood. The trebuchet did not win the fight by itself. Men still had to enter the wound it made. That is the cruel truth of siege technology. It can open the way, but human bodies pay for the passage. For defenders, the psychological collapse could be worse than the physical one. A wall is not only stone. It is a promise told in architecture. Children are raised in its shadow. Markets gather behind it. Bells ring from towers that seem permanent. When stones from beyond arrow range begin to tear that promise apart, people are forced to understand that their world was always more fragile than it looked. The old order did not vanish overnight. Castles and walls remained important for centuries. Engineers adapted. Walls grew thicker, lower, and more carefully angled. Defenders built outworks, improved ditches, used their own machines, and learned to repair damage under fire. War is never a simple story of one invention destroying everything before it. But the trebuchet marked a shift in imagination. It showed that distance, calculation, and stored energy could humble stone. It showed that a battlefield did not end where arrows stopped flying. It taught rulers that power could be built in workshops and transported to the edge of a city. It taught defenders that the most dangerous object in a siege might not be the sword in front of them, but the structure rising slowly in the distance. There is something almost tragic in that. The men who first faced these engines were not fools. They knew courage. They knew walls. They knew the old grammar of attack and defense. They had inherited rules written by generations of survivors. Then, one morning, a beam of timber rose above the camp, and those rules began to bend. History often changes like that. Not as a clean line between ignorance and knowledge, but as a sound no one has heard before. A crack in masonry. A pause in the shouting. A commander staring at a new machine and realizing that his experience has become incomplete. The first great trebuchets did more than throw stones. They threw doubt. They threw it over walls, into courtyards, through roofs, and into the minds of men who had believed that height and stone could hold back the future. And once that doubt landed, no mason could fully repair it. Long after the dust settled, after the ropes rotted and the beams were burned for firewood, the lesson remained. Every age builds walls around what it thinks cannot be touched. Every age trusts some fortress, some tradition, some certainty. Then, somewhere beyond the old range, someone begins to assemble a machine. At first, it looks like timber in the distance. Then the arm drops.